And this next panel is on Indigenous Spiritualities, Global Development, and the Common Good. Interdisciplinary reflections from Thomism, politics, and the theology of marriage and family. The panelists include Mary Christie Ugobi from the Dominican University in Nigeria, Gerald Azike, University of Memphis in Tennessee, and Vincent Arisukwu, Divine Mercy University in Virginia. So I am going to invite them. I think they are online.
Vincent is the coordinator of the panel. So.
Okay, so Mary?
Unmute themselves.
I would ask us to unmute. Those online, you can unmute, and I invite Mary Christine to coordinate the panel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. Good evening, depending on where you're hearing us from. We are here to present the Indigenous Spiritualities, and of course, as introduced by the chairperson, we are a panel that want to look at the Indigenous Spiritualities from the perspective of Thomism, the Igbo, which is one of the Indigenous Spiritualities, and the family theologically, and also the natural setting. So I will start with Indigenous Spiritualities, development, and the common good from a Thomistic reflective point of view. It is a privilege to join this panel on the Indigenous Spiritualities, development, and the common good. At first glance, St. Thomas Aquinas, an indigenous cosmologist, might seem worlds apart, yet both share profound concerns for truth, justice, and harmony within creation. Aquinas' thoughts, grounded in reason and faith, invites dialogue with all traditions that seek truth.
Okay, let's clean the kitchen right now, animals, and then we'll go bye-byes. You want to go bye-byes?
Can you hear me still?
Who is that? Let every other person mute. Tell every other person to mute.
Yeah, please would ask everyone to mute their system as Sister Mary Christine continues to speak, please. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yes, both share profound concerns for truth, justice, and harmony within creation. And I've already said that. Aquinas' thought, grounded in reason and faith, invites dialogue with all traditions that seek truth, starting from the family, which is the basic society, through the Igbo cosmological kind of setting and its politics. For he also notes that omne verum apocumque dicatur a spiritus sancto est. Whatever is true, by whomever it is said, is from the Holy Spirit, in his Summa Theologiae. This intellectual openness provides the foundation for our conversation. It aligns also with Bernard Lonergan's conviction that theology must engage in self-transcending inquiry, continually open to new horizons of meaning through what he calls intellectual and moral conversion, in his Method in Theology, 1972. Thus, the Thomistic perspective, illuminated by Lonergan's dynamic method with these indigenous spiritualities, enables genuine encounter with indigenous wisdom rather than mere comparison. We go to metaphysical foundations, order, being, and participation. For Aquinas, being itself, which is este, is good and intelligible because it proceeds from the one who is pure act, actus purus. All creatures participate it in this divine act of being. In Summa Theologiae 144, Article 1, he insisted, or he asserted that creation is under this actus purus. So creation, therefore, is ordered purposefully and is relational. Indigenous cosmologies exemplified through the family setting, especially the Igbo one, and the Igbo cosmological political setting, express a similar intuition through a sense of cosmic kinship. Everything is interconnected. The earth, the ancestors, the community, and the divine. Their vision of the world as sacred order echoes Aquinas' understanding that the whole universe together participates more perfectly in God's goodness than any single creature. You can get that example, a reference of such in Summa Theologiae Prima Par, question 47, Article 1. Here also, Lonergan's notion of emergent probability offers a useful bridge. He reminds us that reality is not static but unfolding in intelligible order through dynamic, self-correcting process of growth. This mirrors Aquinas' view that creation reflects divine wisdom through its ordered diversity. Both perspectives recognize an inherent intelligibility and openness in the cosmos. What indigenous thought expressed narratively, Thomism articulates metaphysically. We go to the third point on the common good and justice. Aquinas places the bonum commune, the common good, at the heart of political and moral life. The good of the community is not the sum of individual goods, but their harmony directed toward shared flourishing. In his Summa Theologiae, for example, the Prima Secunda, question 90 to 97, you can get lots of those kinds of discuss. In the Regno 1, chapter 14 to 15, you can also get such citations and then discuss it. The good of the multitude, he writes, is more divine than the good of the individual, and of course it is by practice. Indigenous traditions similarly, especially as exemplified in the Igbo family, in the Igbo cosmological arrangements, the Igbo kind of traditional religion, the Igbo political original setting, prioritize community over individualism. Justice for them is relational, rights relationship with people, land, and spirit. This finds resonance with Aquinas' teaching that justice consists in rendering to each their due, establishing right order among persons. We have also some kind of references to that in Summa Theologiae Secunda, question 58 and so on. Lonergan's concept of authenticity deepens this kind of discussion. He speaks of authenticity as fidelity to the demands of one's own conscience and community through continuous conversion, intellectual, moral, and religious. This mirrors the ongoing self-correction and growth toward the good of all. Thus, Thomistic ethics and the indigenous practice, especially as exemplified in the Igbo family, their theological setting, the Igbo cosmology, their political life, original setting, converge through these kind of anthropology, and that is a kind of dynamic one. The common good is not imposed, but discovered and lived through authentic communal conversion. We come to the fourth point, ecology and care for creation. In Thomistic natural law, the created world possesses intrinsic order and purpose. Nature is not raw material but a manifestation of divine wisdom. In Summa Theologia 1 Prima Secunda, question 94, article 2, he mentioned this precisely and tried to explain how and why. In the human natural setting, especially as exemplified in the Igbo natural society or the basic society in the family, you can see that mirrored. Humanity's dominion over creation for Aquinas is one of stewardship, not exploitation. In the Reign, for instance, in chapter 1, in chapter 15, he insists that good governance aims at harmony between human need and the integrity of the earth. Indigenous cosmologies, as exemplified in the Igbo cosmology, Igbo original political setting, and the Igbo family, and we get embodiment of the principle intuitively. The land is sacred not because it is divine in itself, but because it sustains and mediates life. To harm the land is to violate the web of life. Here, also, Lonergan's idea of conversion to the world mediated by meaning is illuminating. True understanding of nature arises when he will transcend self-interest and participate in a higher horizon of meaning. Both Thomism and this indigenous wisdom call us to such ecological conversion, a recognition of creation as ordered towards the common good of all living beings. This joint insight critiques modern technocracy and extravism. It restores the sacred dimension of ecology by insisting that to care for creation is to serve justice and divine purpose. We come to the fifth point, development and human flourishing. For Aquinas, human fulfillment, which is exemplified as beatitudo, lies not in material abundance, but in the perfection of virtue and the vision of God. That he can also say, and he also discusses amply in Summa Theologia Prima Secunda, question 3. In Article 8, precisely, he portrayed what that vision of God is. True development, therefore, is integral. It embraces the moral, social, and spiritual dimensions of the person and the community. Indigenous spiritualities, which we can witness in the family as a basic society, as also exemplified or portrayed in Igbo cosmological setting, we share the holistic understanding. Development is measured not by accumulation but by harmony within the community, with the environment, and across generations. It involves sustaining life rather than dominating it. Lonergan's essay, Healing and Creating in History, 1974, captures this vision beautifully. He distinguishes between progress, which serves human authenticity, and decline, which results from the inauthenticity and self-absorption. Development is for him must be rooted in moral and spiritual conversion. Otherwise, it degenerates into exploitation. From a Thomistic reading, we can confirm this. The end of development is not power or profit, but the perfection of the human person within the community ordered to God. And we see this precisely in the Igbo natural setting. In their cosmology, in their political original setting, in the home, in the family. When joined with indigenous wisdom, this becomes Aquinas' vision becomes a call to reimagine development as integral human flourishing, ecological, communal, and spiritual. Dialogue and complementarity, which is the 6th point. How can we encourage dialogue, or how does Thomism encourage dialogue that is also enhanced by these indigenous communities or indigenous spiritualities? The dialogue, as stated by Aquinas, sometimes, the dialogue that is encouraged by Aquinas is that which is harmonious. For him, reason and faith are harmonious. So grace builds upon nature. The principle opens, or this principle of Thomism opens to dialogue with any culture, starting from the family. And the original family setting of the Igbo is one balanced towards that kind of disposition that seeks wisdom. Indigenous spirituality is grounded in lived experience and communal meaning, bring to theology the texture and depth of the particular. Lonergan also helps to articulate how such dialogue occurs through mutual conversion to authenticity and through the ongoing process of understanding. And of course, understanding, judging, and deciding responsibly. Dialogue is not relativism, but a shared search for truth within the different horizons. Thomism offers conceptual universality. Indigenous wisdom offers embodied practice. Each corrects the other. Thomism guards universality from abstraction, while indigenous spirituality, as exemplified in the Igbo setting, rescues universality from disembodiment. Together, they enrich world Christianity's engagement with justice, ecology, and peace, and so enhances what you call rich dialogue. The concluding vision. To conclude, Aquinas reminds us that all truth participates.
5 more minutes.
Reminds us that all truth participates in the divine truth, and all creation reflects divine order. Indigenous traditions, as we can see from the natural family of the Igbo setting, Igbo cosmology and politics, remind us that truth is lived, not only articulated. It is woven through the relationships, both with God, the earth, and one another. Lonergan's vision of continuous conversion unites these insights. Both Thomism and indigenous wisdom call us to authenticity, to the transformation of our consciousness and structures toward the good of life. Hence, dialogue between Thomism and indigenous spiritualities is not a juxtaposition of systems, but a shared movement toward the common good. A good that embraces creation, sustains community, and reveals the Creator's wisdom. In this sense, to borrow Aquinas' words, the good is diffusive of itself, bonum est diffusivum sui. Summa Theologiae, prima par, question 5, article 4. When we recognize that truth and goodness are shared gifts, we can envision a Christianity that is both faithful and open, universal and particular, intellectual and incarnate. So, in a fractured and yet seemingly globalized world, such a vision is urgently needed. for it is in the dialogue between universality and particularity, between reason, which is intellectus et rei, and narrative, between Thomism and the indigenous wisdom as exemplified today in our discourse through the Igbo cosmology and family setting, that we glimpse the holistic horizon of world Christianity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Such a great presentation. And thank you also for your Latin. That was outstanding. At this time, we will field questions. And if we have, I will always want to check to make sure those online, if they have typed any questions, we can bring it to the fore. But please, do we have any reactions? Okay, any reactions from the house here? Yes, Joseph.
I don't know whether.
Yes,
Is it
you can come here so that the microphone can.
Thank you, sister, for your presentation. I just have one question, and this question arose from the tail end of your paper. Are you saying that indigenous community, indigenous of thought, resonates with Thomism in such a way that what we just have to do, or what we do, is apply Thomism to indigenous thought, or that they are correlated in such a way that they are all the same? Is that what your statement meant?
No, as I already mentioned, dialogue. I was simply emphasizing the fact that with dialogue with Thomism, indigenous spiritualities can truly be enriched, and we can see points of convergence, both in Thomism and indigenous settings, as I already portrayed in the paper. I was not saying that we submerge the indigenous spiritualities into Thomism. There was about, or there seem to be was about, but they can actually be accommodated. They can converge, and I've shown the examples in different sub-themes. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much, sister. And that was great. We have another question. Simon Mary, please come to the microphone.
Sister, thank you very much. I love your presentation. I am particularly curious about your take on the pragmatic dimension to indigenous spirituality, especially in Igbo indigenous spirituality. Pragmatism is at the core of it. With that said, how would you really create the space of distinction away from Thomism? Because African, at least Thomistic engagement thought would not give primacy to pragmatism as indigenous worldview does.
Okay, Thomism is still developing, or is enfleshing in practice today. Thomism is applied. It is something that is evergreen. It mustn't be pragmatic as the indigenous Igbo cosmology. I used a setting in Thomism to really show how the Igbos also can fit in, or can have a kind of convergence with the Thomistic kind of mentality without getting out of it. So it's not like saying both are pragmatical in the same way, or that they are both pragmatic in the way that the Igbo cosmology is. But if you wait, the upcoming paper is going to talk very much on the Igbo cosmology, so you can see such exemplified.
Okay.
Thomism is not as pragmatic, but it can be applied.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you very much, sister. That was just the question. And do we have any other questions from the house? Thank you so much. This is good. So, Sister Mary Christine, would you want to introduce the next speaker? Okay.
Okay, the next speaker is Gerald Azike. He's coming up with the Igbo cosmology and politics. Of course, he's here. He can speak for himself.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Thank you. So good morning again, afternoon and evening, depending on where each of us is listening. So already picking back from what Sister already said, my own discussion, today I am going to look at this question again from the political perspective, which is indigenous spiritualities and politics, the relationship between them, and what role that has played in terms of Christianity, in terms of accepting, and then the problems also these have created. So my discussion today is going to be divided in 3 parts, and mainly given the fact that I am also well aware, with advanced with Igbo traditional religion and also African traditional religion. These are going to be the main reference points. So in these 3 parts, I'm going to talk about, the first one would be to show how political life of the people is expressed through the indigenous spirituality. In other words, what's the relationship between the indigenous spirituality and how that is political. And then the second point would be to look again at the negative impact of the politics of colonial Christianity on indigenous spirituality, meaning what role did the politics play, and especially the negative role in terms of how Christianity, was related in this interaction with indigenous spiritualities and the problem that created. And then the third point would be to see way out of this situation, in other words, how to improve the relationship between Christianity and indigenous spiritualities from the political perspective. So beginning with the first point, in the question of how political life of the people is expressed through indigenous spirituality. One thing that is obvious about indigenous spirituality is that it's expression of, identity of the people, group identity. And as we talk about identity, it's all about the people and who they are. In other words, their identity also reveals their political life. And for the indigenous people, for example, the Igbo traditional religion, living one spiritual life is everything. Religion is everything for them, which means it also includes their political life. And this is reflected in how they are organized in terms of politics. They're organized politically and also socially. If we think, for example, what J.S. Mbiti says concerning African traditional religion, he notes that indigenous Africans, among them, there are no irreligious individuals. Being human involves participating in beliefs, ceremonies, rituals, and festivals. A person cannot detach himself from the religion of his group. For to do so is to sever himself from his roots, his foundations, his context of security, his kinship, and the entire group that makes him aware of his own existence. In other words, following Mbiti's point here, religion is everything for the indigenous people, especially for the Africans and Igbo people. And then that is reflected in the way, actually, when we think about Igbo cosmology, as Sister had already mentioned in the first presentation, we think about Igbo cosmology in terms of their traditional religion. It is a spirit-filled world. Also, they have two-tiered reality in terms of spiritual and also material. But also, in this reality, they have different divisions, how they divided reality. For the Igbos, the first one is the sky, the above, where the supreme being lives. And then also we have the earth, what they call Allah in Igbo lands, where human beings exist, and also earthly goddess and the spirits. And then for the Igbos, we have also the other world, which is the underworld, where spirit forces exist. These spirit forces could be evil ones and also good ones. So in this reality already, we see how spirituality and material, physical and spiritual are interconnected. In other words, meaning that politics is also embedded in this, because religion is everything for indigenous people, especially the Igbos and Africans. But perhaps one may ask this fundamental question: why is it that indigenous spirituality is more political than other religions? For example, if you think about Christianity, well, Christianity is about exists here in this world, but also it makes reference to the other world. So among the indigenous people, especially the Igbos, one thing that one notices among them is that their perspective and their worldview is this world-oriented. It doesn't mean they do not accept the supreme being, but more, the supreme being is there, but more emphasis is on the life here on earth. That means that they focus more on the material well-being and organizes themselves on how to achieve that. Their religion is about how to achieve material well-being, and that's the focus. Like P.K. Sarpong once wrote, that in traditional religion, especially for Africans, among like the Igbos, what interests and occupies the Africans' attention here and now is about children, about peace, about wealth, about longevity, about honor, about health for himself, and shame and curse on his enemies. In other words, it is this world-oriented orientation of these indigenous religions that makes it to be more political, because at the end, what is important is what they are able to get through their spirituality. So in that sense, then one sees how that also affects how they perceive their gods and their deities. For them, these gods, while they are messengers of the supreme being, but they are perceived from the role they play, especially the material role they play for them. In other words, Igbos, for example, in the traditional Igbo setting, could have different deities, different gods. Which one, the one that provides for them is one that is accepted. If one begins to study providing for them, that one is discarded, and then another god is accepted. So in that sense already, we see how they perceive the god from the political perspective of what they're able to provide for them in terms of material benefits. But again, from this, also, not only the world dimension of this spirituality, but also even in terms of the way it's organized, we see the political bent also, political expression of this. So for the Igbos, for example, in terms of the hierarchy of organization of the Igbo being, the supreme being is always there, which is God, Chineke, that is in heaven. But more importantly is the gods and the deities, the minor deities, actually, who are the messengers of this supreme being that provides material needs. And in other words, they are like political agents, actually, in terms of what they provide for the people. But also, apart from this, they have also the conception of the ancestors, which are the spirit of the dead, the living dead, as we normally say. These are the guardians and custodians of tradition, cultures, and also taboos. One could argue that the ancestors for the Igbos act like the police, the moral police for the Igbos, because they are the ones who are guarding and guarding their traditions and spiritualities. Then also we have the priesthood in Igbo land and in Igbo traditional religion, in African traditional religion. These are sacred individuals, seers, diviners, and medicine men. And they serve different deities. But also, somehow, we also see that among the understanding of the Igbos for the priesthood, there's also a political bent to it, because there are some priests who act like political agents. For example, these are the priests who move around in traditional setting, cleansing taboos and in resolving issues that involve the violation of the taboos. One can think, for example, among the Igbo people, the Inri priests who move around in Igbo land. Apart from these also, we have also the other group, which is the traditional titled men, like the other group in Igbo traditional religion. These are success-oriented groups, but they serve also like political agents in settling disputes, and also could serve as intermediaries between the people and the deities. So this is also a sacred institution for the Igbos, even though they have a political role to play. And then the final group are the caste. In Igbo traditional religion, we have the caste system, the Osus and the Opus. These are the ones that belong, they are, because of religious reasons, they belong to the caste groups, but they are politically prohibited from interacting with the freeborns, the Diaras. So already, from this different hierarchical we see already how politics is intrinsically part of the religion, Igbo traditional religion in terms of the indigenous group. But then, thinking along that political line with the indigenous, spiritualities, especially the Igbos, one could then also think about the second part of my discussion right now, which is the role politics has also played, not only among the indigenous spiritualities, but also in terms of its relationship with the outside world, especially Christianity. In other words, the negative impact of the politics of colonial Christianity on indigenous spiritualities. One begins to think, for example, how Christianity, in its evangelization among the indigenous people, was also connected to the colonial politics. Christianity was intertwined with the policy of colonialism. As Magesa once said, that Christianity arrived with Western colonialism in Africa towards the end of the 19th century. And one sees that how that plays out. For example, among the Igbos, Christianity arrived in the southern part of Nigeria in 1835. That was also when the British group were also entrusted with this southern part of Nigeria at the Berlin Conference. So we already see the coming of Christianity and also the coming of colonial group together. This already, again, is also seen in the way the missionaries were viewed more like, some of the missionaries were viewed like political agents of their colonial governments. When one thinks about what happened during the colonial group, while the colonial group were going to these indigenous people to colonize them, the Pepper Bulls, for example, that introduced, one thinks about the Pepper Bulls that introduced doctrine of discovery, permitting the European monarchs to colonize indigenous people in the name of Christianity. We think, for example, such in bulls like Dum Diverses, Romanus Pontifex, and Inter etc. All these bulls, presented these people, these local people, as land to be discovered, to be conquered, in the name of for Christ. And therefore, that made Christians to be missionaries to look like political agents of these groups. Again, also one thinks about in the transmission of European political division that existed between the Europeans to indigenous group. If you think, for example, among the Igbos, when one thinks about the coming of Christianity in Igbo land, I have already mentioned in 1885, the British government came as the political owners of the southern part of Nigeria. While the French people were the missionaries, we see the rivalry that existed between them, that meant to the point that the French spirits and fathers had to leave in order to make room for the Irish priests who came over. In other words, the political divisions that existed in Europe were transmitted to the indigenous people. If you think about, again, for example, the Quis Regio, Quis Religio of Europeans at that time, whoever is the king also determines the religion of the group. And then also the other point was the condemnation of these political institutions, like the other title group in Igbo land, I've already said. Missionaries condemned traditional political institutions, like the convention was the title taken when they came over. So in all this already, we see how politics played a very big negative role in terms of Christianization of indigenous groups, especially in Igbo and Africa. So one sees that and then asks the question, if this is the situation, what is the way out? How are we going to solve this problem? That brings me to the third part of my discussion, which is how to improve the relationship between indigenous spiritualities and Christianity today. The first point I need to make is about history. As Hannibal Okwijano wrote in his article, The Coloniality of Power, he makes this argument that history is man-made and never divine. If history is man-made, then it means that, we could also alter history, imposed on us by colonial Europe, which condemns everything about the indigenous group. In other words, to revitalize and realize, and then also to bring back again the good value that indigenous spirituality has, and what role it plays to play in the spread of Christianity. And then the other point is also the rejection of what I call universalization of the particular Europe, which means during the colonial era, Christianity was framed within the European universalization of their specific culture as the paradigm way of being human. They presented European culture as the way of being human. And that means that somehow they rejected indigenous spirituality. So there is a need today to de-Europeanize Christianity to incorporate the good values of indigenous spiritualities. And this will facilitate better evangelization. As John Paul II once said, a genuine inculturation of faith cannot be reduced to merely adopting the externals of a given culture. True inculturation is from within. It consists ultimately in a renewal of life under the influence of grace. Then how do we do this? I would argue that to solve this, part of the way to solve this problem is to apply what I call the Lonergan's conceptual tools to actualize this. One is moving from the classical conception of culture with its Eurocentrism as the universal standard of all people to an empirical notion of culture, as Lonergan says, that recognize the unique histories of different groups. And this also makes way for cultural pluralism, meaning that God speaks to people from their cultural background and cultural perspective. Again, also applying another tool of Lonergan in terms of the correction of the group bias and seeing truth, as Sister already mentioned, as an ongoing process, not something that's already achieved. Because Lonergan's emphasis on group bias is a powerful tool for analyzing and addressing colonial injustice. With Lonergan, there is a need to be an ongoing quest for continual understanding and revelation of truth. They are never fully reached and achieved at once. Again, also, is in the sense of leveraging the resources provided by the indigenous spiritualities. For example, among the Igbo people, the kinship and authority group. As Pope Paul VI said, noted concerning Africa once, he said, the church views with great respect the moral and religious values of the African tradition, not only because of their meaning, but also because she sees them as providential, as the basis for spreading the gospel message and beginning the establishment of new society in Christ. In other words, with that, okay, great. So with that, then, it means that when we reflect these, traditional political institutions, for example, if you want to think about the other title group, part of the problem of Christianity when it came was the rejection of other title group made it in such a way that Christianity didn't have its footing. Because among the Igbos, before you belong to the town council, you need to be an entitled person. When Christianity rejected other titleship, then it couldn't have a footing. So if we recover that in terms of using that as a way of leveraging spirituality, Christianity, again, I think that will really help in terms of incarnating Christianity in Africa. And then also, the other thing is personal conversion. It's also an essential solution to this because, as Sister already said, Lonergan makes important points about conversion. In fact, he identified 4 types of conversions: religious, moral, intellectual, and psychic. And I believe that conversion on the part of each indigenous people and also Europe and then the whole world will really go a way of interpreting this gap. And then the other thing is also seeing the gospel as a kind of transcultural thing. Lonergan makes this point. He emphasized the idea that the gospel is transcultural and it must incarnate within each culture rather than replacing it. And then also, one thing that is obvious is this, that indigenous spirituality is that platform that we always respond to the message of Christianity. So if we really want to incarnate Christianity among the traditional indigenous groups, it needs to do that within the basis of its orientation, which is cosmology, and that we make a long way to bridge the gap between Christianity and the indigenous group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerald. That was a great presentation, and the applause from here says it to me at least. And while on that, I want to remind our virtual participants that you are welcome to type in your questions in the chat, or if you indicate, we could get you to unmute and ask your question directly. So, yes, we have a question from Simon Mary. Please come to the microphone.
I love your paper, I must tell you. I really do.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah. Now, which got me thinking, though.
Okay.
Enculturation, usually, we talk about enculturation, we're all excited, but we don't want to go to the red meat of it, and we are afraid of being accused of heresy or other stuff. So I'm not trying to lead you that way, but I just want to push the boundaries a little bit with you on this. Now, if you're talking about enculturation, talking about cosmological, using cosmology and then reframing it, and how that can be a way of a new conversation. What are the doctrinal implications? Because that is where I think the gist is. It's not just only about how we celebrate the liturgy and other stuff. How we conceive of God also. How can we then reimagine God through the immanence, the domain of immanence, through this cosmology you have beautifully articulated? And what will be the implications of how doctrines are articulated and all that stuff and tradition? Yeah. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Thank you so much. So, to begin with, I mean, I'm one of the radicals who believe so much about, pushing the envelopes and the boundaries. Simply because part of the problem is already when we, like all the argument I'm making, the question of even the doctrines, how is that actually brought to us? Because one problem that one notices is the fact of the argument I've already made, the issue about the universalization of Europe in particular as the only way to talk. So the point is that we need to reject that. In fact, one of my friends, one of the authors who said, look, shifting the geographies of reason. And when he makes this argument of shifting the geographies of reason, he said, look, from history till now, it has always been the European Western conception of what is reason. And we need to reject that. So for me, the spirituality, Indigenous spirituality brings the whole truth to us. It's about, like, the point about even what John Paul said, Pope Paul VI and John Paul II said, even the Second Vatican Council, in paper, there's always this argument about, incarnate it in the spirituality of the people. But how do we do that? I guess the next paper our father is going to present will even talk about that in terms of Francis, but let me not preempt that. So for me, the point is that God speaks to everybody through their culture, through their ways. So in terms of doctrine, for example, if the doctrine is, remember, we need to make a separation between doctrine and also the European culture. This is what we need to do, because if we don't do that, there is also this expression and promotion of European culture as a doctrine. For example, if you think even in the traditional sense, like I wear the black Roman collar, but I tell myself, among Europe what do you call it? The temperature in Europe is cold. Black is part of making it so heating up the body. If I go to Nigeria, why would I wear black clothes? I know it's a hot, temperate, tropical region. So in this sense, for me, it's separating doctrines from the culture of Europe, the universalization of that. Until we do that, we also ask ourselves, where actually is the doctrine and where is European culture in this? So I am part of what you are making, and I agree with you.
Okay, thank you.
That we need to push the envelope.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Gerald. And I'm also happy that at some point you had made the distinction about rejecting the Ofo title, in that way closing the door to Christianity to the most respectable Ichies of your land.
Unfortunately.
All right. So we can,
Unfortunately.
we can take more questions. Yes, there is one here. Please come to the microphone.
That's good. Hey there. Thank you so much, Gerald. This was a fantastic presentation. So I'm actually an Indigenous person from Canada, but I'm also a canon lawyer. And so I'm wondering how, we're talking about doctrine and culture, and also, I really appreciate you bringing into the doctrine of discovery and, even the role that repudiating the doctrine of discovery that happened to kind of move things along. But what are some aspects that you think that needs to be broken down, maybe particular within canon law, or or if there's areas in which case there's this dialogue and this can happen to influence not only the politics of the church, but it's also in the laws of the church. And so some of the work that might need to be done there. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So again, thinking about actually this argument of looking at Lonergan, about sister even mentioned that point when she spoke, that truth is not just once and all. Truth is an ongoing. I think if we even relate this question to revelation, revelation has happened, Christ has revealed himself. But in terms of the way this revelation is also revealed to people, it's still ongoing. So for me, even the canon law also, from that perspective, if truth is not once and for all, it's something that is ongoing. Canon law also needs to reflect with that. As a matter of fact, if you think, look at canon law in the 1982 updating of canon law, we see already a move in terms of that because canon law of 1982 had also something to do with the Second Vatican Council. However, I think that that movement still needs to continue. in terms of the more God, reveals himself to us through this, the more we also incorporate that as part of canon law. So for me, canon law is also, given that truth, it's not just once, it's an ongoing project. Canon law also needs to update or continue to update itself through that. So I don't see canon law as once and for all. And again, I believe that these discussions and all these arguments also factors into what canon law is all about. But also one sees again the problem about the resistance, from the Western perspective. If you think about the argument against the Pope, with Pope Francis, we see also he wanted to make Christianity again also to talk to all cultures. But also somehow the Western mentality about we have the concept of the truth and the universal is always a problem. So I believe canon law also needs to move on in terms of advancing itself through this. So there is also a need to continue the updating of canon law in the light of these arguments.
Thank you very much, Gerald. Very great response there. I don't see any questions from the virtual participants, and I think I will throw in one just because I like to hear you. Yesterday, in a paper, we talked about one of the things that African Christians can process is the whole idea of reincarnation in traditional African religions. Just quickly, if you may, what's your take on that? Is there anything you've done on that, or how do you react to this whole idea of reincarnation versus Christian doctrine?
Yeah, one thing I would also say is that while I'm making the argument for the this updating of even the canon law and not the rest of them also, but also I think we also need to be careful about some of cultural patterns that actually is, again, problematic in terms of when we are lined up with Christianity. For example, if you think about reincarnation, one of the fundamental issues I see with that is, while I understand the traditional sense, the way it is presented, but the problem with that already goes that if we think about Christianity in terms of when we die, we go to heaven or we go to hell, and in that case, then reincarnation becomes problematic in terms of the fundamental core of Christian eschatology. So from that perspective, while not rejecting the reincarnation in the complete sense in terms of, but I think that what we may do is also to begin to ask ourselves, the idea of reincarnation, what is it actually teaching us about Africans? So in other words, we're not accepting reincarnation as a piece in that sense because of these problems, our eschatology of Christianity. However, we're not going to reject it completely because reincarnation, one of the things it does is about the question of karma. The problem about if you do something, you're going to have the result of it in this. So for me, one of the things that could happen is reincarnation means that if we look at it from that principle of karma, in terms of what you do, one argues that, look, reincarnation is also seen in Christianity, where one argues that going to heaven or going to hell is already a kind of, price you pay for how you have lived your life. So not complete rejection, but reincarnating it in the concept of Christian teaching in order for us for it to align with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please a round of applause for. Okay, with that, I think I know who the next speaker is now. So let us invite Vincent Arisukwu from the Divine Mercy University, Virginia, to present his paper.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Standing on my colleagues' already great presentation, I am going to bring my discussion from the point of view of the theology of marriage and family. And Father Gerald already talking about culture and Igbo traditional religion. I stay in Maryland, but I'm wearing a white Roman collar, not a black Roman collar. So you also understand. We're coming from the same point of view. So for me, radicalization does not mean negation. And it means how to inculturate properly. So my conversation will be divided in the sections, 6 sections precisely. how do I frame the conversation within cultural, theological, psychological, and philosophical basis. The second session will look at the theological foundations of marriage and family. And the third session will look at sexuality as serving as an interdisciplinary bridge. Section 4 will look at the challenges that face the marriage and family within Igbo cosmology and the challenges that face or that the Igbos face in extracting the theology of marriage and family. The fifth session will look at the leading points of the theology of marriage and family and Igbo cosmology, while the last session will look at pastoral pathways to address this issue. If we talk about the dialogue between indigenous spiritualities and the theology of marriage and family, first of all, we could look at conciliar documents and authorities within the church. The first is Lumen Gentium in number 16, and the second is Redemptoris Missio, number 55, and the third is Pope Francis's encyclical Querida Amazonia, during which the Pope addressed the Amazonian people, but still speaking to the global church within that framework. So the encyclicals help us to understand that indigenous spiritualities can be seen as preparatio evangelica, which means preparation for the gospel. And what does that mean? It means that there are elements of indigenous tradition that uphold, or elements within this indigenous tradition that uphold the dignity of marriage, the dignity of fertility, the dignity of kinship, the dignity of reverence for ancestors, just like Father Gerald highlighted. And these point toward fuller revelation that is found in Christ Jesus himself. So, in the Amazonia, in the Querida Amazonia, Pope Francis, in Numbers, paragraph 17, said this: for the church to achieve a renewed inculturation of the gospel, she needs to listen to its ancestral wisdom. She needs to listen to its ancestral wisdom. Listen once more to the voice of its elders, recognize the values present in the way of life of the original communities, and recover the rich stories of its peoples. If you have read Pope John Paul II's encyclical Ecclesia in Africa, you will also hear this resonance very strongly in listening to the rich stories of the people, particularly Africa. And in this case, we are talking about the Igbo indigenous people and the wisdom that resides within their tradition. So the Pope was trying to identify in these values or voices that include openness to God's action, a sense of gratitude for the fruits of the earth, it's the sacred character of human life, esteem for family, a sense of solidarity and shared responsibility in common work, the importance of worship, belief in life beyond this earth, and many other values. And if we marry this with African scholars, we will hear the voices of scholars like J.S. Mbiti, whom Father highlighted so strongly. We'll hear voices of Chinua Achebe. In fact, if you have read The Arrow of God and Things Fall Apart, you would definitely see this sense of family, this sense of social cohesion, this sense of priesthood and sacrifice. If you read the works of Innocent Onyewenyi, the works of our own Cardinal Arinze and Ikenga Metu, you will see the covenantal character, continuity, procreation, and the value of life within the Igbo cosmology. So, if we look at all this, the second question we would try to consider here goes to the family as the first cell of the society. So, within the Igbo cosmology, there is an understanding that marriage and family are embedded in cultural, religious, and social norms that have metaphysical connections. So the family is not only a social structure, but significantly a spiritual unit within the Igbo cosmology. And what does that mean? It means there is the involvement of spiritual forces ancestors, Igbos call them Indichie. Father also mentioned that. We are thought to bless marriages, to strengthen family, to help in strengthening bonds, and as well in safeguarding children. In fact, there are theologians who are talking about how to create this understanding of family and marriage through a proper understanding of the Catholic anthropology that is personhood. These theologians are led by Paul Vitz. They have what they call a Catholic Christian meta model of the person. And this Catholic Christian meta model of the person looks at the positive synergy that is really illustrated by the creation of family and its generational history that forms the crux of the Igbo cosmology, as seeing the family as the first step of the society. The second point here is that marriage is seen as a covenantal bond in Igbo traditional religion. Marriage is a communal institution, so to say. But other than beyond that, it is seen as involving a bond with families, with ancestors and the community. And this is where, when you come to marriage ceremonies in Igbo tradition, the idea of Igbo ceremony as an example becomes important. Not necessarily because it's a social thing, but because it involves a connection with the marrying couples, with the families, but importantly, with their ancestors. In the Igbo traditional religion culture, if my dad is not there living anymore, and there is a marriage of one of his sons or daughters, during the marriage ceremony, we recognize the presence of my dad, even though he's not physically present. That tells us that that marriage is within and with the married parties, but importantly, there is an acknowledgement of the spiritual force that connects them to the world beyond. So how does marriage bring this continuity? It happens through procreation. So children are seen as blessing in the Igbo cosmology, and this comes when we think about the naming ceremonies and the names given to children within the Igbo cosmology. Chioma, Chukwu, Chukwude, Chukwunye, Chinenye, Chizara, Chide, Chidendo. So these things will show you how much we believe in the blessings from God, who is the Chukwu, and then the ancestors who form the bond with the family within the Igbo cosmology. So the continuity of the clan, Mbiti says, happens through marriage and through family life. Mbiti says that the family is incomplete. In fact, it says life is incomplete without children. And we know that in the typical Igbo setting, to die without children was traditionally seen as a calamity because that is the way that the lineage is maintained and sustained. So marriage becomes primarily oriented towards procreation and the survival of the family line. In fact, John Paul II in Familiaris Consortio says this: it is from the family that citizens come to birth, and it is within the family that they find the first school of social virtues that are animating principle of the existence and development of society itself. Also, in the same line, Pope Paul VI in Humane Vitae says, and if each of these essential qualities, the unitive and the procreating, is preserved, the use of marriage fully retains its sense of true mutual love and its ordination with the supreme responsibility of parenthood to which man is called. Humane Vitae, number 12. So, if we look at this, then we could see a metaphysical dimension or a metaphysical character of marriage within the Igbo cosmology. And what is that? Marriage is beyond the biological, marriage is beyond the physical. Marriage is a joining that touches the realms of the visible and the invisible. It becomes a covenant that involves couples, families, and ancestors. That is Ndichie, and then the Chukwu, and then unborn generations. So bringing continuity of being becomes a channel for transmission of life force, the force vitale. So that ontological function of sustaining the chain of existence, uniting destinies, That is why every Igbo person is said to have a destiny, a chi. Your chi is your akaraka in the Igbo concept, your chi. That destiny is not just you, but it defines you as well as connects you with the wider kinship network that Sister even talked about in the ecological setting from a Thomistic point of view. So marriage aligns personal destinies into a shared future that is blessed by God and the ancestors. So we could remember that Paul himself had even talked about this in his letter to Timothy in the Bible. When Paul says, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his own family, he has disowned the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This is a marriage between the perception of Igbo cosmology of marriage and family and the Christian concept or understanding of it. So this communion of words helps us to understand that within the single family, there's a connection beyond the single family. Therefore, in Igbo culture, marriage and family collaborate with the living and the dead. But importantly, families celebrate the union of marriage. The ancestors bless marriage, and then the unborn are called into being. If we look at it further, then theological foundations of marriage and family will help us to understand this movement. First of all is how theology connects the dignity and communion with common good. One is the view of covenant. In theology, Christ is the center of that covenantal relationship between the church with the church. And St. Paul says that just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. So a man will leave father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, St. Paul says, about the relationship of Christ and his church. The second is the idea of sacrament. In Genesis chapter 2, we read about God creating man and looking at man and says, it's not good for man to be alone. Let us make a helpmate. And the Bible says, for that reason, a man leaves his father and mother and unites with his wife. But this union of man and woman is transformed and elevated by the idea of sacrament, which Christ himself speaks to in Matthew's Gospel chapter 19 and Mark chapter 10. So that reaffirmation of the foundational basis for marital bond as a permanent covenant instituted by God becomes important. The third is that the church is a domestic church. The family is the domestic church. And Lumen Gentium number 11 states that the church as a domestic church is where the school is a school for children, for teaching and for education of children. And in that sense, the Igbos talk about ezi na olo. Ezi, that ezi, you can also use it in the verb form to show, ezi showing, or even in the pronoun form of having. So to show and to host, and the ono means the structure. So if you unite both, you will see where the family becomes the seat of showing children, of protecting them, and of guiding them towards life. The frameworks for this engagement.
5 minutes to go.
Okay. If we look at the Catholic anthropology as developed by Paul Viss, we see the anthropology of the human person within the family as constituting reason, constituting emotion, constituting body, constituting freedom and communion. And to lead me to the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is human sexuality as an interdisciplinary bridge. We often misunderstand sexuality, and that's the problem we have today. I listened to the papers earlier when the sister was talking about Vietnam and father was talking about Mariology and all those feminist movement and all that. it is important to recognize that sexuality has different dimensions. There is biological sex. Sometimes we reduce sexuality and humanity to that biological sex. Biological sex helps to define male and female, and fertility is acknowledged through biology. Sexuality is grounded through biology. But that does not define sexuality and the whole understanding of human relationship. Sexuality has a psychological understanding where intimacy, relationality, and the capacity to love becomes a part of a definition of the identity of a man and of relationship. In that sense, there is no commodification of persons within the relationship. The sociological dimension helps us to understand the structures of kinship and community within the society. And then theology helps us to define sexuality as a vocation. That vocation to communion, it helps sexuality to do what? To reveal the image of God. And in this sense, we see challenges that face Igbo cosmology in the framework of marriage and family. Number one is the idea of dignity. Number two is the idea of freedom. Number three is the idea of mutuality. Number four is the idea of justice. And here we could see where Father also mentioned the idea of gender roles and patriarchy. Patriarchy can distort marriage and family understanding, and it also distorts the perception of personhood. With the Catholic teaching and modern ethics demanding more egalitarian understanding of relationships, it becomes what we could do to clamp down on this patriarchal representation of marriage and family within the Igbo culture, whereby if I pay your bride price, then I have privilege, I have power, and everything depends on me. The second is the caste system that Father also mentioned, which impedes marriage and family in Igbo culture. How could we place the labels and stigma on individuals from our own sociocultural definition and understanding? So what does polygamy, as an example, also in the third category do? Polygyny, we are historically entitled to marry as many wives as I want. So the value of intimacy becomes questioned because it's only promoting that sex understanding from the biological satisfaction and from that biological point of view. And if we look at it, then it becomes, what are the meeting points here between the Igbo cosmology, the indigenous spiritualities, and Catholic theology? Number one is that theology and family affirm that marriage is a divine institution. Family is the domestic church, a privileged place where faith is lived. And then we talk about the seeds of the word in indigenous cultures, where we have deep reverence for creation. Number one, we have ancestral memories and generational continuity. We also have communal identity and interdependence. And then rituals around marriage can also be improved. Rituals around birth, rituals around death. And then it becomes what we can do. How can theology and marriage, and theology of marriage and family affirm and elevate the concepts within the Igbo culture? Father already talked about enculturation. So how can we embrace cultural expressions that do not contradict the gospel? I'm telling you that a part of it stems from politics. And if we can enhance our representation in universal church and in ecclesial politics, we could also help to solidify and strengthen the positive values in the Igbo culture and not see the Igbo culture as a trash. So how can we do that through politics and empowerment that helps us to appreciate what we have within the Igbo culture? And then how can we promote sacramentality within Igbo celebration? How can we promote indigenous respect for nature and family as an echo of the sacramental worldview where the visible reveals the invisible? And third is synodality. How can we listen to indigenous communities in their context as to discern how and where the Spirit is already at work within the Igbo culture? And finally, the pastoral pathways for me would be to create a pastoral integration map, whereby Dialogue leads to inculturation. Inculturation is approved and approached in the liturgical life, and then catechesis becomes a way to witnessing to the richness and the depth of Igbo spiritual values and cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very energetic presentation and deep also in the message it communicates. I want to open up the room for questions or reactions. Yes, I will give the virtual participants priority always, but for now, Simon Mary.
I'm trying to get.
Comes again.
Yes, I'm trying to get the value of my money for coming here. My dean paid for me that, so I have to do that. I really love your paper. Something tells me that the fullness of your paper has not been heard yet. So you were leading somewhere. That said, and maybe I want to take you there, or maybe I'm the one going there alone. I don't know yet. You began initially by talking about preparatio evangelium or something, the preparation of the God, for the good news, which got my attention. I was like, what do you mean? The gospel, the culture is if we understand God correctly, God is present everywhere. Nothing prepares us for God. God is already there. It is our openness and discovery of that. So I think a proper Christology needs to be, and a Christology that is not restrictive needs to be deployed to understand how Christ is present in the culture, how the Spirit is also present there. And then you went further when you were talking about marriage, and the relationships, the sexuality, and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, interesting, this is great. Where are we going with this? If the expression of relationality, intimacy between people, it's also supposed to instantiate the relationality, the intimacy God has with us. Why then do we restrict expressions of this relationality to particular ways of expressing it? For example, heteronormativity. This seems to be the critique of those who push for an opening to queer expressions and all that stuff to us as a way of expressing the divine love. I wanted to hear more about that. I don't think I knew you touched on that and then you moved on quickly. And then there is there is a reason why marriage is considered a natural sacrament. So it does not need fully the sacramentality. Yes, we bring Christ into it. Christ grants that. But the individuals, we have an expression of being able to instantiate that union God wants us to embrace there. So what I'm just saying now ties to what I said initially about the critique of how you are saying that culture is preparing for the main gist, that nothing is really the main gist. Culture is the main gist. But I want to hear more about your take on expressions of intimacy outside of heteronormativity.
Those are the questions.
Yeah.
The Igbo cosmology in relation to Christian theology, we will still go back to the roots. Christian theology is based off of the Bible. First of all, from the beginning. In fact, when Christ was answering that question in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19, that statement was from the beginning. From the beginning. And he said, male and female, he created them. So this already sets the platform for heteronormativity and binary relationships. And then, if we go to our culture, as you said, we could also ask about value systems and our way of life. How does the Igbo believe that life comes into being? That's the basic question we could ask from the beginning. We know we have what is called Aro and Omenala, right? The totems, the cultural values that even our ancestors handed down to us. Even before our forefathers started hearing about or accepting Christianity, if we read the story, life came in through male and female. You could even talk about the man wanting to have more women. Never was it said that a man wanted to have a man in marriage in our Igbo culture. Otherwise, in fact, there was a day we had a he-goat trying to cross another he-goat in my compound. Oh my, that day my dad almost killed that he-goat that was jumping on the other he-goat, right? But this is like, that's the belief. And what he said was, oh, this is arrow, is totem. So we are looking at the Igbo culture as a conveyor of a value system that impresses what is good and what is handed over to us from creation. That is what I would say to that. If we go further, we talk about all this gender fluidity. Gender fluidity is not a part of our culture. Gender fluidity is not a part of what we have always believed and what we have embraced. So the culture does not contradict Christianity from the point of view of intimacy and relationship. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Vincent. I have one question from a virtual participant, which I will hold on to. But now let me invite Professor Dadowski to make his input.
Professor Arisukwu, John Dadowski. Thank you so much for your. Since you didn't mention Lonergan and the other two presenters did, I decided to ask you a question. No, I just have a comment, and you can decide how you want to respond to it. Your presupposition of preparation for the gospel when it comes to Igbo culture, if I understood that correctly. Just to say that there's been criticisms of that approach because it presumes a kind of fulfillment so that eventually Igbo culture would be swallowed up. That's the fear. So another approach has been to presume that the Holy Spirit is already present there. And so the method becomes discerning the fruits of the Spirit already present. And so just two different methodological assumptions, if you have a comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the presence of the Holy Spirit is everywhere. How we interpret and run with this presence is what belongs to us. Yes, within the Igbo culture, it is believed that the Spirit is there, and the Spirit is believed to be the guidance for what is good. That is why we kind of make these arguments, because we believe that the Holy Spirit in the Christian concept is inspiring. And then, just like Father mentioned in his paper, if you look at the concept of the Igbo as Chukwu, and then you look at the flow through us.
Yes? How you doing?
Hello. So, I think there's some interference from the virtual. So the Spirit is present, and the fulfillment of the Spirit's work comes through us and through our relationships with one another, and then with one another to link us up to God in terms of doing what we feel that is God inspired. So I agree with you that we have the presence of the Holy Spirit in every culture. But then how the culture is able to discern what is good from what is bad becomes where the Spirit leads and where the Spirit does not lead.
Thank you very much. And we are several minutes late back, but I think we need to take this one virtual participant who has a question. Professor, do you want me to read this or do you have it?
Just read it.
Okay. Why is it necessary to regard anything good in indigenous cultures as just preparatio evangelica? It is better to see those good elements in indigenous cultures as the way God communicated with those cultures in line with Hebrews chapter 1. Those good elements were not preparation for the gospel, but the way those cultures fulfilled their spiritual needs independent of what a future gospel would offer them. Wonderful. This sounds like a contribution, but you can react to that, Vincent.
I really don't know if I need to react to this because he's affirming what we already said, right? So thank you for the contribution.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, I don't see any hand, which is good.
I have my hand.
Sorry.
I have a comment to make, please.
Okay, yeah. Quickly, and then
I'm not
we go.
pushing back.
Yeah.
I just wanted to just make the following comment based on research that I do. That in Igbo culture, you made a comment about how life comes to be. And that's why I wanted to say no. In Igbo culture, it's more complex than that. You have even notions of wanyi ha araha and okbensi and other stuff. And then you also have fluidity, queerness in Igbo culture. It's also religiously, cosmologically tied. Queerness is tied to the cosmology. You find this in initiation rituals. It's not something you find very open, so you may think it is not there, but it's within the religious rituals of initiation, you see queerness being expressed. So I wanted to just make sure that that was not lost in your reduction of life being just within the mediation of a man and a woman. Igbo culture, from at least the research I've done for many years now, it's more complicated than that. Thank you.
Can you give us, Father, before you go, can you give us an example of queerness in Igbo culture? So
Okay, I'll give you one simple example which is quite telling. There's a video of that. I didn't even know a paper was being presented on this. The monarch of Asaba, Arisukwu, was having a ritual, and then immediately a trans, what do you call it? Those who dress, not those who have the organic gender change. Cross-dresser, yeah. Comes into the palace. The Igwe stands up immediately and bows to this cross-dresser. Every person in the palace stands up and bows. So I remember going there and interviewing some people and asking to tell me more what was going on. And I was told the following. The cross-dresser is the one who embodies as an embodiment of the cosmological harmony. And their power is beyond the power of the Igwe. And once they come into that space, the Igwe must give affirmation to that power that has been embodied in that presence. Sometimes, because of colonial trauma to our memory, we have lost some of this stuff. You find it in diasporic religions and initiation rituals outside of Africa in the Americas and also, but it's still within Africa there. So I can go more on that, but I don't want to. I just wanted to just correct that quickly before we went with the wrong impression on that.
Father, yeah, thank you.
Though I'm not a priest. Oh, go ahead.
No. Oh, okay, bro. Thank you so much. What it means to respect dignity of every person, from defining a way of life and a way of coming into being. This is a global discussion, and it's good we define things. The Igbo culture does not believe that life comes into being through queerness. That is not correct. Okay? There might be a risk. The Igbo might have recognized this. A recognition of the dignity of the person is different, which is a part of what even Pope Francis was pushing. The recognition of the dignity of the same-sex person or the lesbian is different from acknowledging it as a way of life and as a way of coming into being, which defines the culture of the people or the culture of our faith, the nature of faith. I don't know if that makes sense.
The elan vitae, the transmission of life is mediated through queerness as well. So that's what I'm trying to say. Anyway.
No.
Okay.
No, that is wrong.
Well,
we are not going to live and let that sit in this space. Please, that is wrong.
Somebody has their hand.
okay. I think it's we should. Okay, let's get Gerald, please, quickly.
Yes. So please, the only point I want to make about it, the argument about the harmony of the Igbos, which the questionnaire pointed out is important. However, in terms of that experience you get about Arisukwu, that experience actually doesn't express the queerness of the Igbos. So because if you remember, the Igbos also, in terms of harmony, so that individual that came in represents that. After all, when you think about male and female, when they come together, that is the harmony actually. So one could also argue that that point you made is not expressing just the question of queerness in Igbo culture. Rather, it is expressing the higher understanding of this unity in terms of harmony of the Igbo conception. So that interpretation could also be interpreted in another way. That's the point I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father.
Wow. Thank you very much, everyone.
Say something.
Okay, sister, please go on.
Yes. Just like Father Gerald just said, that instance is far, far beyond what the Igbo can, or what he can say is queerness in Igbo culture. It doesn't represent Igbo as being queer. Instead, even it harmonizes what we are trying to emphasize. And please, when you study a culture, go deeper to understand the intricacies. It's not just on the peripheral. When you pick it on the peripheral, you understand it as something queer, which is not even what it is representing. That is even saying something as the Igbos believe. The divinity is always in grace, and they believe the higher dignity or the divinity should be honored beyond the smaller ones, which leads them to the chi and the divinities. But we don't have the time here to express all those.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much. We don't have the time to continue, but this is wonderful. And before we head off to lunch, I just wanted to read this comment from this participant. This is awesome. I am privileged to participate from the airport in Jordan, about to board Air Ankara back to Nigeria. Congratulations to the organizers and all who participated. Thank you very much, AK. And with that, I would say, please, another round of applause for this panel. Yeah, sorry, I will ask.
Do you have lunch for us from here?
Okay, while we prepare the virtual sandwiches, I would ask us to please reconvene by 1:55 p.m.